Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Today's guest is Kerrith Brown, the president of IMMAF, the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation. Before starting his managerial career, he was a judoka and managed to win a bronze at the 1984 Olympics. In Olympics 1988, he once again competed for the bronze and won, but had his medal taken away after testing positive for doping. In this episode, Kerrith Brown talks about his personal experience with doping, how that helped him when IMMAF recently achieved WADA signatory status. Moreover, we talk about IMMAF's 10-year anniversary, the possibility of MMA in the Olympics, and how Brown's career has gone side by side with previous podcast guest Densine White, finally ending up together at IMMAF. Kerrith Brown, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
It's a pleasure to finally meet you and to be interviewed by you. So thank you very much and appreciate the platform.
The pleasure is mine, and I'm very happy to talk to you. You are the president of IMMAF, the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation. So first of all, what does that role include?
Yeah, so I was appointed in 2015 as the president of IMMAF. IMMAF is the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation, which is the international governing body to develop the sport of mixed martial arts in terms of how the sport has progressed from initially being born from a professional inception, especially with the UFC at the beginning. And it's unusual for an amateur body to be started in the 21st century, as long as combat sport has been in existence from day one from ancient Greeks. So it's quite unique in the sense that the founder members, George Selford and August Wallen, were the founding members who had the idea and the vision to get the sport regulated and recognised, because as of yet, the sport is still not recognised by any umbrella organisation, and there's a process, i.e. if the vision is, and that was the vision, to one day become an Olympic sport. So that process was the task that was set in 2012, and subsequently I came on board in 2015 to really develop and take the sport into another direction and another level, and to pursue the visions of it becoming an Olympic sport one day.
On an earlier episode, I spoke with Densine White. He's the CEO of IMMAF, as you know, obviously, and the listeners as well. So he spoke a lot about that, to be recognized, to be an Olympic sport, to be a member of GASEF and with WADA.
Yeah.
So if we start there, so you recently gained WADA signatory status.
Yeah, that's correct. After a 6-year battle to obviously get the sport regulated through WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency. It's been a constant battle. We took WADA to court in the early part of the run to get the sport under the co-signatory, and that was quite a challenging political battle, with a lot of especially core sports potentially blocking the sport from being recognised. So through the process of GASEF, we applied. Then we were told that we had to become a signatory to the code. We applied. They knocked us back on the basis that we weren't ready. Then it was coming from a third party. GASEF blocked our application, which was illegal in their statutes. In effectively, so we challenged that, and subsequently we forced a change, I believe, in the WADA's policies and them to change their own statutes with the new president that came in. And I have to thank the new president, Mr. Banker, who came in, and for the first time to have some clear process, and transparency is the key. Is that we weren't subjected to a roundtable conversation being blocked by combat alliances or combat international federations. And I think it was very pivotal in our process to be recognised that we were given the opportunity to have a fair process, which is what we've always asked for. We just want to be measured, not because of who you know, but in terms of what we develop and what we structurally do in terms of governance and transparency, and the integrity of what we do was very critical in ensuring that we became a signature to WADA. So we were given a new process. So even though we had gone through the old process, which, again, we thought was slightly unfair, considering we've had 5 years of good governance and probably one of the gold standard international federations. We then had to go through a new process, which was initially a conversation to halt the proceedings through the courts in order to, kind of delay the proceedings, and we suspended it for the time being. And we went through the new process, and that took 12 months and a lot of work and a lot of, financial support around that. And as of December of 2021, we were successful through that process and probably at a gold standard in terms of that recognition. So, obviously that has a massive impact with our national federations, because that gives them more legitimacy in terms of development, especially within certain countries that are still trying to find or trying to regulate the sport in various territories. So that was a big milestone for IMMAF to be the only international mixed martial arts federation to be WADA accredited. And, that's something that we're very proud of in terms of being able to go through that political landscape.
Congratulations on that. And you said that there was lack of transparency and you weren't invited to the table. UFC has been working with USADA for a couple of years now.
Yes.
So what do you think was the biggest reason for why WADA did not want to work with you initially?
GASIF was the main stumbling block. So GASIF and the council members and the combat international federations were just basically blocking us because of, competition. That's the bottom line. They're afraid of the growth and the speed of mixed martial arts. Everybody says it's the fastest growing sport. It has a massive fan base of over 1 billion people that have access to the contents of mixed martial arts from every country. It's very universal. It has that universality that, you can go to any corner of the world and everybody understands MMA. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like football. You can go anywhere and you get it straight away. It's very unique in that sense, because if you do judo or karate or taekwondo or wrestling, it tends to be very specialized in various countries, and, not everybody can have the same access and development as some of the countries. So this makes the sport very unique. And I think there's a fear, the fact that we're in the early days, it was said that we would take athletes from their own sport. And that's, for me, is a wrong statement. What we bring to the table is that we're opening the combat market for more people to come into the sport and obviously engage in other disciplines. That's the way it should be viewed, rather than being narrow-minded and just thinking it's a small pot and, we're going to take their top 5% athletes that are going to come into mixed martial arts, especially on the professional side. And that's where probably that's a greater mindset, that we're feared that their top athletes would migrate to the likes of UFC, which is really, for me, is not the right approach. And we feel that we bring a value to the combat community, and there's a bigger pool when you have more engagement. And the next generation, they're the ones that will dedicate themselves to the sport, and that will dictate where the market goes. You know what I mean? The youth are our future. And that's one of the reasons of the goals, is to regulate the sport to ensure that the next generation are looked after. And it's not the old perception of being barbaric and blood and all the rest of it. And the cages, they're like animals and stuff. It's completely the opposite. It's the media frenzy that have created that kind of hysteria around the sport. And our job is to change that perception, going back to the grassroots and building the building blocks for the sport, that it's a sport for all. It's recreational. It's not just about fighting. 5% of the athletes will contribute to the elite end and, compete at Worlds and Europeans and maybe one day Olympics. But for sure, the rest of it is recreational, and it's a bigger market. It's volunteers, judges, referees, cut men, cut women, you name it, coaches, and the whole infrastructure of a sport, just like any other sport, like judo. We understand that 70, 80% of the membership is based on youth. So, and that's what we intend to do with the sport of mixed martial arts.
That's interesting. You mentioned the road to the Olympics, and now obviously the WADA is one step closer to that. And how is the response now from GASF after you got the recognition from WADA?
So it's quite interesting, actually, because obviously we were into our 7th year of our application, and how the GASIF application works is that there are certain requirements through the process to gain observer status. At the beginning, when we first started, there was basically no real clear process. It's just you talk to the GASIF representatives, whether that be a member from GASIF, in order to review your application. And in that application, you have to have 3 years of counts. You have done a minimum of Worlds, Europeans, Continentals. You have to show your general assemblies, through general assemblies, and also show that your national federations, in terms of their development, whether they have a certification around National Olympic Committee or being gained through the sports minister. Of that process, that was never clear from day one. It was just kind of a nod and a wink, and if you were in the right pack, you might be lucky to get in, and that's always been like that. So it goes to the council members. The council members review it. Now, on that panel, it just so happens it's more heavily combat representatives, and straight away you kind of reach a roadblock from there. So not going to give any names, but certain international combat presidents were actively blocking our application. So basically, the application would go to a round table of 8 people, 12 people, sit down, review the application, and at that point, the specialist in the combat meeting would say, well, we're not sure if this is the right fit, and if this organisation has the right values, and so on and forth. And basically, at that point, they can turn around and say, not this year, and no, we're not supporting it. Then it gets thrown out, and this is where it really gets frustrating. You're not given a reason why that it's been rejected, and that's a clear violation of no transparency for me. And for an organisation that is supported through that alignment through the IOC to basically be run and led by international representatives is a clear violation for me. And not only that, the integrity of how that is being managed, we're uncomfortable with, and we've been uncomfortable with for over 7 years. And as I said, the fact that we've gone through that process, and as the years have gone on, Patrick Bouman was the next president we were dealing with. Unfortunately, he died. And then we had an interim president that came in, which was Stephen Fox. Then we had another president on top of that, after that, who came in. And at that point, we basically hadn't even had the decency of meeting any of the presidents to talk about our case. We were just basically told to go away and not have any discussion around why or how or what can we do to improve it. Nothing. So over the years, we've strengthened our application. We made sure that we met a gold standard. We had a lot of governance reviews. We changed the board. We did a lot of things that met the IOC's recommendation to be what we call a gold standard international federation. So we're very proud of that. And obviously, and at one stage, we were told by GASIF that there was a conflict of interest through another party in terms of WAMA. At that time, it also started the amateur development through Vadim at the time that was running M1. We were told by GASIF that we had to amalgamate in order to be able to come through the door. Once we amalgamated, because there were 2 sports or 2 international federations that were trying to cover the development of mixed martial arts, we were told that in no circumstance, if you do not join and clear up the compatibility of both of you, then we would not be able to become an observer status. We did that in a record time. It took us, we got to the task in just over a year. We were able to do that legally by 2 parties coming together and working to develop the sport as one, so that was WAMA and IMMAF. We joined. We did it through the members. They did it through theirs. It was a long process in terms of all the legalities in order to make sure that it was legitimised by the members and voted by the members and accepted by the members as a clear process. And we did all that, and we took it back to GASIF. And I think they were shocked at how quickly that we were able to amalgamate. And I think that caught them out, because normally to get 2 organisations to come together in short notice, normally if you look at Taekwondo and a few other sports karate, it's taken them a decade for 2 parties to come together. But we did it for the benefit of developing the sport. And I think that caught them out. And subsequently, we went back to them and said, well, we've done it. You've told us, you've mediated us, you've told us to do it. But still shut the door in our faces and basically just shut down. No information coming out, no reasons why. What happened with the application, we don't know. And then all of a sudden, you get pushed to the next meeting. Then you get swept under the carpet and just complete a wall of silence. And really, we came to the point where our strategy was, let's just get WADA first before we go and attack GACIF, because the next decision was how we were going to deal with this organisation that was blatantly just being a cartel. And that's the only way I can put it in terms of its development. So we chose to wait till we were successful with the WADA application. And subsequently, in the meantime, the last president in GACIF had just been recently changed, because in GACIF, in their statutes, it's changed every 2 years, the president, under the new guidelines that they've been changing it over the years. So there's a new president, Ivo Ferriani, and subsequently came in last year, to our surprise, that had come in, and I think within 2 weeks had decided that they want to disband GACIF, which was quite a surprise to everybody. So it's been muted. And I've always felt this GACIF role has not been successful in its way that it's been dealing with application, especially when you look at our application. It just doesn't function in the way that it should. And I think it's been reviewed. And we kind of, we're not sure where we go after this, but luckily we've had some communications with GACIF that have allowed us to feel that there is a change, just as the same with WADA, with Mr. Banker coming in. And we feel that, for the first time, there's a bit of integrity in terms of the new president that wants to be fair and all-inclusive and making sure that the process is going to be adhered to a proper process. Because the last organisation, in my opinion, were just not right in terms of their approach. And again, this is through the blocking of the combat sports and the fear that mixed martial arts is the new emerging combat sport, and that they feel that they have to shut it down because, that it will have an impact on their own development of whether that's judo, karate or wrestling or boxing or whatever. So, we're fully aware of that, and we're pushing for change under the new president. We were fortunate that we had a representative for the first time in 6 years to come to our World Championships, which we just recently had in Abu Dhabi. He came to just kind of look and observe and then report back to the new president in terms of how we're set up and, review our annual report and just basically just kind of look at the whole application. So we're a little bit more upbeat in that, same as where we were with WADA, that I think there is a change, but there's a big change for GACIF that are under threat of being shut down. So we look forward to the challenges around that. And, we're very optimistic about with the new president coming in that, we will probably get a fairer review of our application in order to justify, 7 years of lobbying and trying to do the things that would have a massive impact on the sport and the change of the sport in terms of a global aspect of our national federations, especially now that we have the biggest part of the jigsaw, which is always WADA. So I think we have a better chance in trying to obtain that if there's a fair process and it's transparent. And, we're confident that what we've developed and built over the years has enabled us to put us in that driving seat. As you know, there are always competition for other claimants of other international federations that will proclaim. But, we feel that we've done enough to be in front with what we've done with the sport to date.
Yeah, it sounds very promising. And just looking back to when I spoke to Dan White a couple of months ago, it feels like you've come a long way since. So let's see what the future holds.
Yeah, it's challenging, and for political reasons, I'm still probably holding back, as you probably hear through the conversations, because obviously we're still in the process of applying for the application. So I don't want to say or hopefully say anything that would damage our chances of becoming an observational member. It is a very difficult process. It's a very political process because not only the combat sports, you've got to look at newer sports that are coming in that want to go through that process to be recognised by the IOC and potentially become an Olympic sport. And everybody knows that MMA is the fastest growing sport right now. It attracts from all corners of the world. So as soon as you put the words MMA, everybody starts to listen, and it's about youth. I mean, this sport isn't even scratched the surface yet. You've got to remember, it's only, since our development program, 7 years. Now, when you look at my own sport, judo, you're talking about 80, 90 years, 100 years of development. Do you know what I mean? 64 was the first Olympic Games. So when you look at where we are in comparison to the other combat sports, there's a fear that this is the new sport. And it's a bit like breakdancing. Who would have thought breakdancing would have been in the Olympic Games? You and I would be like, are you serious? Breakdancing? Come on. MMA has been in its own version from day one. And, because of the fact that the way it was born, it was unusual for a sport to be born upside down. And if you look at a pyramid, you're on the tip, starting from that, the base is the other way around. We've got to change that pyramid, reverse it. And when you reverse, you're going against the grain because it's already commercialized. So why do you need amateurs? There's no money in amateur development. When you look at those amateur athletes and then have to then migrate to being professional. So a good analogy of that is boxing. So every 4 years, you have a ton of athletes that win medals at the Olympic Games and then go pro. There's the similarities. So it's no different, but it's just reverse at the moment that everybody has bolted with the mixed martial arts. They've come from wrestling or judo or karate, and they've had a platform where they can show their skills for the first time. Whereas boxing has always had it. You know what I mean? So it's no different that somebody who's been doing karate for 30 years decides that he wants to do mixed martial arts. Why not? He's 5% is an elite athlete. He wants to put his skills and his test against somebody else that might be good at grappling or striking. So, it's changing, it's evolving. And that next generation, you are going to see over the next years that it won't be coming from wrestling or judo, it'll be coming from mixed martial arts. We've developed the whole curriculum, the whole infrastructure that athletes will just be from that pool of just mixed martial artists as opposed to coming in from the core sports. So that will change again over a period of time. And that's the fear factor, is that we're just building our own sport to accompany the next generation, because that groundswell is only going to get bigger and bigger.
I also want to talk to you about the IMMAF 10-year anniversary, which you celebrated here recently. What does that mean to you?
It's a big milestone in terms of 10 years. I mean, 10 years is not a lot when you're competing against the likes of wrestling and boxing, and that have had, the linear years of development. So 10 years is a milestone in the development of the sport. And, along that 10 year, there's been a lot of key milestone where, we achieved a lot for the sport in that short space of time. And the reason for that is that the world has changed with, the way we communicate through mobile phones and through the internet. Back in the old days, it would take you a long time to put meetings together, to get people and go through that process. Now, at the speed of the internet and the platforms that we can use, it's enabling us to move the sport a lot quicker in terms of that communication. MMA was born on social media, so it's comfortable. That's where it's at. It's happy to do its dirty laundry on social media as it does. But not only that, it does a lot of good stuff in terms of development, and it's able to connect with the world in terms of how it looks and how it feels and how it performs. And we've utilised that as well. It's very difficult because that's where the youth are. They're in that space. And if we're not engaging in that space, then we become like a dinosaur. We're still developing our ecosystem. And what I mean by it is building the members within that community. With fans already there, there's 1 billion fans out there. Now we've got to build the ecosystem from the bottom to get them to engage in all the other activities across the board for the recreational development. And as I said, it's a great feeling to have the 10th anniversary of IMMAF, and it's good for the national federations in terms of their input. We can't do it without our national federations, and a lot of our national federations have gone through the same political pushbacks in their own countries. And part of that, of the 10th year anniversary, is to raise the awareness of where we are currently and to demonstrate that, we are an international federation that wants to add value to the combat community. We want judo and boxing and all the other combat sports to feel proud of the work that we've done. because it's safe. It's in, we've done all the right work to ensure the development of the sport. And I'll give you one example is that, in our development, one of the key milestones for the first combat sports to make a recommendation, no headshots under 18, that's a massive statement. You know what I mean? That shows that we want to develop. And when you look at the concussion policies and the concussion that has been reviewed through not only just combat sports, rugby and other, we're a game changer. When you say that the recommendation is no headshots for under 18, everybody looks at you and goes, what do you mean by that? It's a combat sport. Well, you don't have to have a headshot. It's about the development of the athlete. And when they're 18, they can make that choice. They want to get punched in the head or kicked in the head. Why not? We have enough data around the issues around concussion. Even football are looking at it. So I think, we've contributed something where we're prepared to stand up and be counted and show that we understand the development. And not only that, it's political, because if I put a kid in a cage, we don't say cage, we say safety area, then the whole world freak out. Oh, you got kids, it's barbaric, it's this. Yeah, but there's no headshots. So what's the problem? And the cage is a safety feature. It's not barbaric. It solves the problem of stepping out the mat and falling out and all the rest of it. It's a safety feature. It's not barbaric. Get over it. So, just changing the whole language. We don't say ground and pound, it's groundwork. Ground and pound just serializes the fact that it looks more barbaric than ground and pound is probably one of the safest things. It's very hard to get to talk when you're on the floor to hit a grounded opponent. And the referee's there to save you. We don't have a standing 8 count if you can't defend yourself. So the referee steps in. It's one of the safest sports out there. And I say to a lot of people, judo's more dangerous than MMA. You know what I mean? And people look at me as if I'm mad. I'm going, we have all the data, over the last 10 years of all the competitions that we've done. And we can break it down from TKOs, KOs, arm lock strangles, you name it. We've got it. And it's one of the safest sports.
I can see how people have trouble with believing that if you're not into it, because if you look at it, it might look a bit barbaric, as you say. But I think that what you have done, that you start from the youth and the development, and you said no headshots for under 18, and you start to work from there. And I mean, adults should be able to make their own decision. They know what they're getting into. But at least for the youth, I think that's a great start for kids to make it as safe environment as you can. And then they decide later on how they want to pursue their professional career.
Yeah. And the problem is that because it's at the fans, there's 1 billion people that watch the sport. They've been watching the sport at a professional level. So if you look at the analogy in terms of professional level, because of the elbows and knee strikes, that makes it even more dynamic. So when the elbow cut, it's a cutting motion, cuts and there's a lot of blood. But it's no different than professional boxing. If you take Tyson, who bit somebody's ear off in the ring and all the rest of it, that's the professional level. But nobody talks about the amateur boxing. It's different. The point scoring, sometimes they use head guards or, you know what I mean? But you don't see the similarities when people start saying, on the professional side, it's barbaric. Well, if you come to the amateur, there's hardly any blood in our competition. We just had a World Championships in Abu Dhabi with over something like 450 fights. I think probably was 1 nosebleed. That's how safe it is. Do you know what I mean? In terms of eye poke, I think there was maybe 1 eye poke. You know what I mean? Because of the design, the work that we've gone into safeguard the development of the sport, it's critical. The slight rule changes to adapt to maintain that we look after the athletes' development as they go through their career and the pathway to ensure when they make that change from amateur to pro, that they're in good stead. And we stop this old situation of doing 6 matches and then going pro. Ridiculous. You know what I mean? You couldn't do that in boxing. You couldn't do that in any other core sport. Suddenly saying that I'm going to be a professional athlete just after 6 amateur fights. Crazy. So we're changing all of that in terms of the whole development and the whole structure of how we develop the sport. And obviously that's through our backgrounds, coming through, what we've done in our own careers.
I want to go back to what you said with that. People who watch the sports, they watch the professional MMA.
Yes.
So couldn't that be a threat to your recruitment? Because let's say a kid comes to their parents and says, I want to do mixed martial arts. And then their parents checks the latest UFC. And that might look too violent for them, for example. But that's not on the amateur level. So don't you think that some people might shy away from the sport because they don't know about it enough?
I think that's changed. When you look at the work that the UFC have done in terms of providing safety for their athletes and the development of the sport. They've done a phenomenal job. There's other promoters out there that have equally done, their share of the development of the sport. And I think there's a lot of education that's gone around. And now you've got the international federation as ourselves that are the link to educating the fans. We said there's 1 billion people out there that watch the sport. Now we're educating, and they will go on to their kids, and the kids will say, I want to do MMA. I want to be like a Khabib or John Jones or, Amanda Nunes or Ronda Rousey. That is out there, and the sport has the data to support the development and how safe it is. I mean, UFC having a phenomenal data of the medical data to support the development of the sport. So, anybody looking out there for the first time, yes, there might be a few fights that have been a little bit bloody, but that's no different than boxing. We've seen boxing. There's been more atrocities in boxing, in terms of its development. Boxing has been there from day one. They set the benchmark and the template. MMA have just taken that, and because it was born on social media, has amplified it through that process. Now what we've got to do is, like you've said, we've got to educate that next generation. And believe me, they are educating. We've only scratched the surface to where the sport will be. And I've said 7 years is nothing when you're up against 100 years. Just think what this sport will be like in 50 years. Never mind 7 years. So our 10th anniversary is obviously, it's a key milestone. It's a fantastic achievement for everybody that's been involved. And I'm very proud to be part of that and to have the support. Not only that, without UFC in supporting and, sponsoring the development, then we wouldn't be able to connect. We wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd be saying, well, everybody just thinks it's barbaric and it's this and it's that. And without the development of the grassroots and the building blocks, we wouldn't be at this stage now. Especially without the social media, we'll be miles away. It would take us another 50 years, like all the other sports, to develop.
This episode is sponsored by InSport Education, the online business school for sport. They offer a range of different courses, for example, Foundations of Sport Business, Private Equity in Sport, and much, much more. As a listener to this podcast, you get 10% off all of their courses using the code SportsManagementPodcast10. Click the link in the description below and sign up today. If we talk a little bit about your career in sport, you started off as a judoka, and then after that you made a more managerial career. So can you talk about your career in sports?
Yeah, sure. I had a fantastic development within the sport of judo. So I started from the age of 12. And at that point, I was being bullied in school and decided that I was going to kind of try and look after myself in some shape capacity. And it was just fortunate at the school that I went to, I started the sport of judo. So I had a couple of lessons, quite liked it. It gave me a little bit more confidence to look after myself. And from that, really, never really looked back, and kind of decided that there was a school competition, and that if I did well, that I was going to continue. I managed to take a silver for my very first school inter-tournament. And, at that point, I decided that I would try and take it a little bit further and never look back. And then from there on, really just developed, started training, going to regularly lessons, and then started to enter more competitions, started to get a little bit better, and then eventually found myself into the England squad, and then started to go internationally as young as 16, representing a country, and then really start to nail down the pathway, eventually going to the Olympic Games, and subsequently going through Continentals, Europeans, World Championships, and then the Olympic Games. First Olympic Games was 1984, where I took a bronze medal. That was my first. It was 21. And, just missed out on Moscow, funny enough. I was too young at that time. So, it was great to kind of go through that journey. And, sports, where it is today, is not the same as where it was in the 80s and 90s. Great experience going into LA. Very proud of the fact that I was given the opportunity to represent my country, and, was on fortunate, I was unlucky not to be in the finals. I found myself on the wrong end of, again, controversy in terms of the scoring, and, I was kind of robbed of going into the finals, and I was successful at defending and going for a bronze medal. Continued after 84, then went to 88. Unfortunately, in 88, I was favourite actually to do well. And unfortunately got caught on the end of politics again through being done on the anti-doping side, found positive, and again for all the wrong reasons. And it's well documented. Totally made a mistake in terms of not informing the right process. There was no processing back in those days in terms of where we are in terms of education and stuff. And unfortunately, I had an impact where I had my bronze medal taken away from it. And, the experiences that I had from that, has been giving me the reasons for going into managerial and going into the sports and developing to protect the next generation so they don't have the same experience that I had. And having experienced that on a world of other levels that you couldn't imagine in terms of where I was and how it was represented, how it was handled, how the politics got involved, how the corruption got involved. I decided to one day come back and try and have an impact of my own experiences coming through 88 to protect the next generation, to ensure that they wouldn't have an unfair advantage of where I was at that point in my life. I think that was really a turning point for me in terms of trying to develop. I retired came back to try and go back for 92. Was unlucky, I had to move up weight. I was number 1, number 2, and at the time went for the trials and got beat for the first time in the national trials after so many years. And then I decided that was the cutting point, time to call it a day. So I retired in 92 and then decided to open up my own business and get involved in other entrepreneurial businesses, which I did. So we set up various clubs and went into the fashion industry, opening and doing clothing. And we did that for over 30 years. And in between that, I was always still involved in the sport at a very high level, but in the background, just kind of working, sometimes sponsoring some of the next generation as well. And at that time, I'm pretty sure it probably might have come out in Denzo's podcast. Myself and Denzo, for whatever reason, have had the same pathway. We grew up together. We went to the same school. We started judo at the same time. We went to 2 Olympic Games. We trained together for a lifetime. And now we've ended up in IMMAF as, kind of I usually say to people, you don't get one president, you get 2 for the price of one. Do you know what I mean? Or 2 scale, call it what you like. But it's been a fantastic journey. And that in itself is another story of how we've just gone in parallel in terms of development over the years. And, he's had a fantastic career, just recently MBE, and he was 3 times Olympian. And as I said, we've had a fantastic journey, world medals, European medals. So to come back to this sport, and what's ironic, which we were sitting down talking about it the other day, is that the LA 2028 Games is around the corner. And there's a mutter of that MMA could be in the Olympics. But what a story that if, we were to go to LA 2028 as a demonstration sport, that's our first Olympic Games for both of us. That's like a complete journey. Not only going back with a new sport in the 21st century against the backdrop, against the political scandals and you name it, just going back with a new sport, which is one of the fastest growing sport that has over 1 billion people that is attracted to this sport. What a story. So, we've got our own journey. And in between those journeys, as I said, we've had a lot of milestones, a lot of learning in terms of development. Denzo was 12 years in British Judo. Ironically, I took over after Denzo. After 12 years, I took over as the next president for 3 years before I had a public spat with the International Judo Federation, Marius Vizia, over MMA, funny enough, about this sponsorship regarding the European Championships in 2015. And that's why I resigned and then became heavily more involved in MMA to show the rest of the world that it is a sport and it is a safe sport. And you can do anything that if you put your mindset, you can do anything to achieve and be successful. When somebody tries to put you down and tell you it can't be done, that's what we do. We rise to the challenge because we feel it's the right thing to do. We're doing it not for our own egos. We're doing it for the right reasons. We're doing it for the next generation. As I said, my own personal careers have had my own ups and downs, and I'm going to use those as an example and and to protect the next generation, to ensure that they don't make the same mistakes. So if you look at the WADA, that's a big area for me, ensuring that the education and that the athletes are not just left in a sea of information that they don't understand, they don't have the support, that, the coaches don't understand. There's a whole learning curve around about anti-doping that even now, there's still people are not being educated. And that's a massive problem for me. So, for our sport, within mixed martial arts, we want to ensure that we build on that to ensure that these athletes, and we make sure that they're clean athletes. And if we catch them, we'll deal with it, but we'll give them support. It's not just about catching them. It's the aftermath. It's what it means to those athletes and what it means to their families and their friends and their own environment and how you deal with them. So there's a massive learning curve that we have to adopt, and learning from the past and being able to put into the future development.
Wow, what a career, both as an athlete and as a manager here now. And I would just like to go back to your experience with doping. And you said one time that your lack of education about prohibited substances led you to make a mistake that cost you heavily. And you said that now also the lack of education on the topic. So how important was this personal experience for you when you were now talking to WADA from IMMAF side?
Massively, because of my own experiences and understanding that there was no education back in the 70s, 80s and 90s. I mean, what athletes did in that period compared to the current period, strength conditioning, nutrition, we never had any of that. We had one doctor that did everything, physio, strength and conditioning, lifestyle coaching. We never heard anything about lifestyle coaching and being managed in terms of, we had a coach that looked after a group of players, and, our England coach was not our personal coach that, had to quickly adapt and then throw us into a system that nobody knew half about, do you know what I mean? So, that lack of support and the federations financially not having the legal team or not having the same support as some federations that are a lot well off has a massive impact on how you're dealt with it within the system. And that, we can see that happening if a sport is not recognised because it doesn't get any finance. It has a knock-on effect on the national federation. When the national federations can't deliver, it has an ultimate knock-on effect to the coaches and the athletes. The coaches are primarily the key figures that make or break an athlete. Without that support around the coaches, then you get all the issues that get kicking. Do you know what I mean? And that's the fear if you're not well funded or you're not recognised. It's having that lack. And then it becomes transparency, and then it becomes the integrity and everything else, in terms of the legal standards in order to ensure the development of the sport. So it's pivotal that the experiences that myself and Denzine have had that, we kind of bring to the development of mixed martial arts. And that's difficult when we're working against the backdrop, when we're even being politically pushed back. So that makes it even harder. The fact that there's less support governmental in terms of the national federation makes it even harder, because the national federations are relying on an individual or a group to try and self-finance the development of the sport because they're passionate about the development. And really, we all have a responsibility to protect the next generation. And, our role as the elders, and it doesn't matter whether it's us within mixed martial arts, it's all sports, including the combat sports, have a responsibility to ensure the safety of the next generation. If we leave a sport unattended to and drive it underground, what do you expect? Do you know what I mean? It then becomes barbaric and bloody, and why should I put my kid in that? But, we're at fault if we don't fix it. You can't leave, especially in the 21st century, you can't leave anything unregulated. So it's like a mobile phone, and you say to a kid of 3 years old, here's a mobile phone, and you don't protect where that kid can go on that platform. If you choose to leave it open and they can go anywhere, what do you expect? Do you mean you have to police it? We have a responsibility as the elders to ensure safety development within a parameter. And that's where we are with mixed martial arts. We're in a parameter that if you don't protect it, it's only recently where we changed the decision in France. So it was banned in France. They're one of the last countries to have banned the sport of mixed martial art, France. And we were instrumental in changing that decision. And one of the key things was no headshots under 18. France have a fantastic membership for judo, over 600,000 people do judo in France. Absolutely amazing. I mean, in the UK, we have something like 42,000 members. So in the comparison from going 1 hour from UK to France, over 500,000 people doing judo, but it's structured, it's development, and it's part of the development of the sport, and it has a great platform for kids to be involved. 8% of their membership is kids. So it's great for the integrity, development, friendship, everything that you'd want out of an international sport for the next generation to aspire to. And that's what we want for mixed martial arts. We want to aspire, coming from judo, it's what we're going to bring to the table. We want to make sure there's fair play. We want to make sure that the diversity in the sport is there. We have it. We have, women competing from day one. You know what I mean? So there's no barriers. We're looking at gender equality, women's commission. We've done everything that the sport needs to be at a gold standard. We're delivering it at every level. So it's critical. The information that we had in the past, bringing it to the future, plays an important role as the development within a new sport. And that's pivotal to the direction of where we are. So in 10 years, that's a massive milestone for us to get where we are.
Yeah, definitely. And just in the example with France, now we have the heavyweight champion in UFC, Francis Ngannou, went through France and trained there. And I mean, so much has happened in so little time. And I'm sure the upcoming years here, a lot will happen as well.
If you take France again, I mean, UFC were pivotal in changing the legislation by supporting us in terms of the legal and getting to work with the Ministry of Sport. And that just shows that not only do the professional side of the sport, such as, say, UFC, understand that there has to be a regulatory development and a recognition, and the regulation of the sport is important, not only at the top but at the bottom, in order to change the perception and to change the perception of the sport and to change communities. It's having an impact. If you look at Francis Ngannou, his story, you couldn't make that up in terms of where he's coming from, Cameroon, and going to France, living on the street, and then going on through his training camps. It's well documented, and now being a UFC world champion. What a story. But it changes lives. That means that the next generation, whether you're coming in as a refugee or wherever, you have an opportunity to change within this sport. The sport changes lives. Take Ronda. Ronda's from judo, so I know very well. She was an Olympic medalist, had no money, living in a van, one of the biggest superstars in the world. For a girl looking up at Ronda Rousey, to be self-empowered as a woman in sport, what a journey for her to be an ambassador for the next, females in the sport of MMA. We've just had International Women's Day. What a great story that she's had. Kayla Harrison's now following that. She's another judo girl as well. She's had issues along her career and in terms of her own life story. But, she's now able to have a platform. She's found a home. She's now making money to be able to look after herself. Not everybody can become a judge or a referee in their own sport. Not everybody will get a position that they want to be passionate to still be involved in the sport. But when you leave the sport, you have to make a living. And, some sports, I think, are a little bit too critical in the sense that if you go to another sport, you're excommunicated. And we've got many examples of that, including myself at Denzine from our own sport, but that's another story.
I feel like we could talk for hours and hours here. I told you before we started here, I said it would probably take half an hour closing into an hour. But is there something that I haven't mentioned yet that you feel is important to mention about either yourself or IMMAF or mixed martial arts in general?
I think in general, the message for me is clear, is that we have to look after the next generation. It's about youth development, and the sport will continue to grow at a phenomenal rate. It's not going to slow down. People say, oh, it will slow down, and that we haven't even scratched the surface of the next generation. So my fear was that we have to get it right in order to protect the next groundswell coming through. And when it does, that we're ready to be able to police it. And I think IMMAF has done a fantastic job with everybody that's been involved, from the CEO right down to the founding members and the board members. The staff are heavily involved in the development, and without them, in terms of their engagement, then the sport wouldn't be where it is in terms of the foundations and the base. So, as I said, it's unusual for the sport to drill from the top back to the bottom, but everybody's pushing in the right direction. The key message is reaching out to the regulator and the people that are politically blocking, is to stop blocking the sport, have the sport, embrace it, and help develop it for the next generation. The sport's not going to go anywhere. It's only going to get bigger. You can't stop the youth. They'll dictate where they go. Breakdancing was in. That was youth-led. Do you know what I mean? We're all engaged into skateboarding. You know, we had young athletes that were competing at a very young age. So the youth are our next generation of people that we want. And I feel very proud to be part of this development. I'm very proud that the UFC have given us that support over from dot one. You know, everybody's fully committed and gets it in terms of making sure that we understand the development and to ensure that we change the narrative. It's not a barbaric sport. It's not about caging people in there to beat each other to a pulp. There are rules and regulations, and people sign and understand the development of the sport. And, you know, it will continue. We'll ensure that we protect the sport. And then the key message is that we want recognition. We want to be recognized as a sport. It's the 21st century. If you can have breakdancing in the Olympic Games, why not mixed martial arts? It's a sport. It's well governed. You know, we have the national federations to support it. And, you know, we've got good people that have been lobbying to ensure that the development of the sport. And we get it. We understand the professional side of it. We understand that they have to sell the sport, and there's a certain element that they do, which is no different than boxing. It's the same. You know what I mean? The same kind of the way that they sell the sport and how it's presented. It's the same as boxing. And there's an amateur side of boxing. There's an amateur side of MMA. It's the same. And, you know, we're very proud of the work that we've contributed to get where we are. So, you know, for me, it's about youth and empowering the next generation of youth across the diversity to ensure whether it's black, white, red, blue, green, whatever you are, you can come to this sport and you'll be well represented for sports for all, recreational for all. And there's an elite background for those who want to compete at the elite level.
That's great. And the last question that I ask everyone is that if you could choose the next guest on this podcast, so someone from the world of sports, who would you recommend that I would speak to?
Wow, that's a good one. I'm going to go Ronda Rousey. For a female that's come through diversity, come through a sport that's been blocking to where she is now and her own career, and you know, it's a complete journey, and you know, you have to admire what she's gone through, and I think her backstory is even more compelling.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'll keep that in mind. Kerrith Brown, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Sports Management Podcast, and good luck with everything in the future.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.